Hi, welcome to Philosophy All Along. So, I wanted to spend just a little bit more time with you, kind of talking about this odd social obsession that's going on with this like sexy serial killer, right? This idea of we have a strange comfortability with a man who hunted another person down, right? And then shot them repeatedly in the back. And um, this idea seems to be one where our society as a whole is not responding the way that one would expect in a tragedy, right? Because again, the man who was killed, right, the CEO of this healthcare company, um, presumably had people who cared about him, and his life has ended short. There's no possibility for him to be able to do good into the future, and so on. And so there's a tragedy involved, and yet our society is like um, raising money for him for the alleged murderer for his legal defense. Right, he's going around as a meme in a lot of ways, and people can't seem to stop talking about his abs. And I think it's really important that we make note of this. And I think it brings to mind a few things that are really very, very important. Um, so I'm going to avoid just in this discussion kind of saying his name in part because one, I don't want to mispronounce it, but also because I think there's a strong tendency that we have towards kind of uh, making making celebrities, if not heroes, out of people who do horrible, horrible things. And I don't want to encourage that. So the alleged murderer um, seems to have hit a point of kind of almost a folk hero quality. And it's important that we ask why, right? Because in having that discussion, that doesn't mean that we're approving of a murderer. Um, but we need to understand why our social response is so lacking in compassion, right? Now, one reason probably is that we're kind of a low compassion society when you think about it, right? We tend to criticize the idea of being a political, we tend to criticize the idea of being like a bleeding heart, right? You know, this idea of being a snowflake and stuff like that. So we already tend to be like, oh, it's weak to show compassion. But I think in this particular case, we're very, 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 very low compassion, if anything, kind of celebratory. And the question becomes, well, why? What is it about this particular circumstance that people are showing so little sympathy and so little concern for the fact that someone had been murdered, right? And so probably we should start with these bullets, right? So on the bullet casings themselves, what you end up having is writing, which I think adds to a mythos. It makes it less a matter of like, oh, this person was just trying to get money or something like that. That this is a matter of trying to make a statement, a social statement. So the bullet casings said something along the lines of delay, deny, depose, if I recall correctly. And the reason why this is important is because it's a direct reference to something that's regularly said within the insurance industry in regards to dealing with claims. So particularly anyone who's dealt with like a car accident. So I was in one not that long ago, and it was just a nightmare. Like it's clear that the insurance company is doing everything that they can to give you as little as possible, or not to give anything at all when it comes to like the replacement of your vehicle. Like it's just this battle. And the one of the weird things that I had discovered about it is that people who have a lot more money have a lot better chance of getting more money out of the insurance company. So there's already this weird inequity, right? In dealing with it, basically what I had been told was, well, if you had the money to go to court over it, you could probably get more money for your vehicle. But as it is, your vehicle only being at this particular value, it's probably not worth it, et cetera, et cetera. So people who are in car accidents and their vehicles $100,000, $200,000, or what have you, they're way more likely to get responses from the insurance company that are more considerate and more invested. Now, again, you might point out, well, their vehicle is just worth more, but I think that is also my point, right? That wealth begets wealth. And I think that that is where the problem is in terms of how we're responding to this alleged murderer. So the bullets use this phrase that's used in the healthcare um, insurer industry, which is particularly concerning because unlike say like your car or even your house or something like that, people's lives are on the line. And we should talk about that. But basically, apparently, and I didn't know this until this moment, right? This within that field, there is kind of this mantra of, well, step number one, delay them. Now, that you've probably experienced, right? Whether it's getting paid out for some sort of healthcare issue or your car or whatever else. Like they will take as much time as they can. In and apparently in the hopes that something will go wrong for you, right? Like the worry is that in the health industry, that part of the delaying tactic is the hope that you will die before they have to pay. Oh well, yeah. I guess paying out now is kind of pointless, right? So then what they'll do is deny it, even if there is reason to pay out, in maybe in the hopes that again that you'll die, or also it's one of those things where some people just throw up their hands and say, okay, well the claim's been denied, there's nothing I can do, right? That you have to have the means to fight back, you have to be able to take them to court and so on and so forth. And so then the last one is a reference to going to court, explaining, you should be prepared to explain yourself in court. So in other words, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, if you delay, maybe the person will give up or die. If you deny it, maybe they'll give up or die. And then when you go to court, again, you can kind of hope that maybe it'll be found in your favor. So in other words, it just increases the likelihood that you don't have to pay out. And so this seems to be something that has moved our population. Like, I don't think that this should just be reduced to, oh, well, maybe people are kind of, moved by a murderer. And they wouldn't be so many movies and TV shows about murderers if people didn't find it somehow interesting, right? But it isn't just that. And it isn't just a matter of like, oh, the guy clearly works out. It's also a matter of, I think we are keenly aware of wealth disparity in our society. In fact, that's probably one of the main reasons why Donald Trump got elected, right? Is that people are very, very aware that there's different sets of rules for themselves than there are for those in power. And it just so happens that they, for whatever reason, believe that Donald Trump is someone who is on their side about this and is going to go after these people in power who don't have to play by the same rules. An excellent and antiquated example is O.J. Simpson, right, being found not guilty for the murder of his wife. Now, merits of the case aside, it's just really important to note how differently that case would have gone had he not had wealth. I mean, in all reality, right? Seriously, like think about it, right? We're talking about decades ago, a black man being found running from the police, trying to get away from the police after his wife and her lover are killed, right? So, like, what are the chances that this guy isn't going to be found guilty? I mean, it's amazing that he survived just this slow motion car chase, right? Like, notoriously in our country, black men are killed in those kinds of circumstances. So the point being is he had a whole lot of money and it placed him in a different circumstance than for the rest of us. And so I think that that's what we're really talking about is that we are very aware that there's a different set of standards for the wealthy and the powerful than there is for us. So it reminds me of why it's particularly of interest in healthcare. Like, so not just in terms of justice, which is, I think, part of the argument. Like, there's people who are kind of treating it as if the CEO kind of had it coming, and so they have less sympathy for that. And it's really important that I think we don't do that. There's not a single one of us, I think, that gets out of life totally innocent, that have made no mistakes, that haven't harmed anyone. And you might argue, well, this person's done a lot more harm, so on and so forth. But that's also why you have a trial, right? To be able to demonstrate that this, in fact, actually is the case, and you allow for the possibility of redemption. Your point, I think, would probably be, but there's such a disparity between the fact that this person, these CEOs and these people in power, they can do whatever they want. They're never going to go to trial. And so let's talk about that briefly. I want to argue that the wealthy have a control over life and death that is denied to the rest of us, that is reminiscent of like these ancient empires, right? You kind of like look at like Babylonia or the ancient Egyptians, and like the oligarchs around the world right now, who they get to make decisions about other people's lives and deaths that the people themselves don't have access to. That in theory shouldn't be the case in a democracy, or as people feel the deep need to keep reminding me, in a representative republic, right? So okay, so my grandfather uh, got cancer. So this was a while back, right? He has since passed. So my grandfather got cancer. He got a melanoma. It was very uh, virulent, right? So they tried to remove it. It just seemed to piss the cancer off, right? And it's wrapping itself around his neck. And at the same time that this had happened, like from the beginning, they had said, well, there's this experimental medication that might be able to save his life or at least extend it. But it has to be approved by the FDA. Okay, that's cool. Like, let's approve our medications. Like, let's put them through a rigorous process first. That makes sense to me. And so he is waiting for the FDA to approve the medication, right? And then the next thing that happened, though, is they finally approve it. So this takes a little while. And keep in mind that cancer can move very, 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 very fast. So this takes a little bit of a while. So then we find out, okay, the FDA has approved it. And we're like, yes, okay. Some time has passed. The cancer has gotten worse, but maybe there's still time for this medication to help some. And so what ended up happening next was the insurer had to approve it, which isn't something that I had ever known about. Like, you would have thought that there would be a position such that, okay, the FDA has approved it, the insurer would have to approve it as well. But no, it doesn't work like that. They're like, oh, well, this is new. We're going to decide like whether or not you actually need it, you know. So it's a whole process that took months. And by the time that had finally happened, it was, I think, by the time they were like, yeah, okay, I guess we could do this, like, it was too late, right? And he died shortly thereafter. The reason why I bring this to mind is it is exactly what those bullets said, right? We didn't even get to deny, right? Just delay. And they never had to pay out for the medication, which would have been very expensive as it was a new one, so on and so forth. They never had to pay out for it. The reason why I think that this speaks to me, other than the obvious, is because it reminds me of the fact that had my grandfather been a wealthy person, he could have just purchased the medication as soon as it became approved by the FDA. He wouldn't have had to wait for the insurer to do it. So there is greater access to life if you are wealthy, right? In other words, you can access the things that might save your life, um, medications and caregiving, so on and so forth, with much greater ease and greater facility than the poor can, or even the middle class can, even if they have insurance. So if insurance is supposed to act as some sort of equalizer, right? The things that you normally can't afford, the insurer will help you afford because you have been paying into it. You've been working hard. You've been paying into this. Okay, so now we pay it out. Well, it doesn't equalize. It isn't. It isn't in fact actually true, right? Like, there's that guy who's like a billionaire who's pays, I think, a couple $1 million a year to try and reverse aging, and he's like literally like replacing all of his blood and doing all of these things that seem really crazy. But I can tell you what, there's the guy looks better than I do at my age, right? And I think he's older than I am, or around the same. Like, it's wild, right? So the point being is we know this. We know this. We know this. We know that we do not have the same access to life-giving treatments. We know that we don't have the same, like, we know that the jobs that we go to are far more likely to be harmful than the jobs of the wealthy, who kind of just, I presumably, get to spend their time going to the gym, right? Like, who has time to go to the gym? Like, I work all the time. Who has time for that? I don't. So I think, though, that that's one half of it. I think the other half of this lack of sympathy for the CEO and kind of folk hero making of a alleged murderer is the the dealing out death aspect. So one, you have greater power and control over your own life if you're wealthy. You have greater right to life if you're wealthy, but you can met out death in ways that the justice system will permit, right? So kind of that OJ Simpson vibe, but that one's very kind of on the nose. What I think people are seeing and what they're concerned about is well, aren't CEOs like this people who get to make decisions about other people's lives, which results in deaths, but they never ever have to face a court for it. They never have to face a jury. They never have to answer for it. They just get to go and presumably live their happy lives and have a great time. And so, whereas when we do things that potentially cause the death of other people, we're in significant danger, right? I remember talking to a person who they knew someone who had been driving and swerved because there was an animal in the road, and they didn't want to hit it, and their passenger, like they got in an accident and their passenger died, and they were charged for that. They were charged, I think, with like manslaughter. Like they went to prison for it. And yet there's people who presumably are in different industries in our country, making decisions that result in people's deaths, and they get away with it, right? So the healthcare industry being one, we're like, okay, we're gonna do everything we can to pay you out, to avoid paying you out. And your first thing is, well, okay, do people actually die? That's just like a dependent, it just affects whether or not they get like money. But no, it literally, as like in the case of my grandfather, literally can prevent the person from getting life-saving treatment that they just cannot get unless the insurance does pay it out. So in other words, people do die as a result of insurers' decisions, right? And decisions that they make. So they can make that decision. They can hesitate. They can delay. They can deny. They can depose. They can do all of this stuff. We don't have that same kind of freedom, right? We don't have that same kind of freedom to met out death, to let people just, die and not have to face justice for it. So this to me is probably why people are having this whole kind of weird response. It's super unhealthy, super unhealthy response. And I think it's a sign of a deep resentment in our country, a deep resentment because we are aware that there is this difference. And it's not like the CEOs and the very powerful don't know it, right? I mean, we've got to stop BSing ourselves. Like, there's people who are acting like Elon Musk is this amazing person, but he's also reportedly his companies over and over and over again have been found liable for doing things like like dumping toxic wastewater in environmentally sensitive areas, in areas that potentially could make human beings very sick and stuff like that. And he's like, it's fine, whatever. He's fighting back so that they can continue doing that. And if that results in people's deaths, he'll be fine, right? He personally will never have to go to trial for that, right? And he certainly won't have to worry about going to prison and being treated as a murderer. It'll be more of a kind of white collar crime, like, well, your company is going to be fined some money, and usually it's not enough money. When you fine a company something like $1 million, for a lot of these companies that doesn't. It's like, okay, whatever. Like, oh yeah, for us it's a lot of money. For them, it's virtually nothing. And the CEOs are like kind of keenly aware of the resentment that this breeds, which is why, and you should look this up, it's wild, how many of the wealthy are building these kind of secure complexes. One, I think even has like a moat where there's these massive complexes that have all of these security measures. Uh, and they say it's in case like the world ends, zombie apocalypse kind of stuff. Well, first of all, the fact that they have access to that is boggles the mind. But in addition to that, who are they actually? They're not protecting themselves from the zombies. Come on, you're protecting yourselves from us. If the world economy tanks, if something goes horribly awry, they're concerned that people are going to come after them, either out of resentment or because they want their stuff, right? And so you're going to build the biggest fences and the biggest walls and protect yourself as much as possible. And one of the first things that happened after this CEO was murdered was he uh, people like him started calling security companies. And so some of these companies, so I remember hearing an interview with this one guy who runs for like security. So I was like, yeah, the phone's been ringing off the hook, and it's been CEOs who are calling because they want to increase their security, which is just not something that you or I could do, right? If we had a reason to believe that people were after people like us, we can't afford personal security or moats. So, anyways, uh, to me, this is a warning sign of a uh, an illness within our society. It is not a sign that we should go, "Yay!" No, this is again. There must be a tragic component to this. I don't know. I'm reticent to name names or to look into people's personal lives and stuff like that. Like, but I assume that there's people for whom this death is very tragic, and I think that any death is always concerning insofar as it prevents the possibility. Say you do think that he was a bad person. As soon as they're dead, they no longer can do anything to improve, right? They can't be redeemed in any way. And I think sometimes people like that. They're like, haha, you went to your grave awful, right? So we never have to engage the possibility that maybe you tried to improve or you did something better or you earned forgiveness, right? So all of that is really very sad. And if the man who was murdered had family or loved ones, it must be really hard for them to turn on the TV right now. Imagine how nightmarish it must be for them to see like viral pictures of the presumed murderer going around where people are lusting after the guy. That's got to be really tough. I know if, like, when my grandfather passed, if something like that was happening, I just would have been so broken over it. And so yeah, I guess my bleeding heart goes out to them. But the symptom that we're seeing, like this is symptomatic of an illness in our society that's deeply connected with wealth disparity and deeply connected with the fact that we know that the most powerful amongst us kind of get to dance on our graves a bit. Like for them, it's a win when they don't have to pay out. Like when we die before they have to pay out to help us, it's high fives all around. And that breeds a terrible, terrible resentment. That's a danger in our society because you have the inequity isn't just a matter of fairness, it's a matter of morality. And that a society can't survive like that. It's like, like there's a point in time where you're a teenager in your family and you realize, like, what there's a horribly disparate set of rules between your parents and you, and so you're eventually like, I've got to go. Like I can't, like, you all get to do this, I don't get to do this. And eventually you're like, I'm an adult, I need to exit out and live my own life and make my own choices. But we're all stuck together. Like, so we have this very, very powerful group of people who get to make decisions about whether or not we live or die. And they face a totally different, basically, criminal justice system when they do make those decisions. And so it stands to reason that people get resentful and do crazy and awful things. And if we as a society don't come together to start addressing this, like, if we should be using this moment not as a meme, but we should be using in this moment as a moment to kind of go, what is so wrong with us that we would be willing to kind of make a hero out of a murderer? Like, that's a problem. What's going wrong with our heart here in our society? And then we and the CEOs and so on and so forth, we as a society should be coming together to try and sort it out. And I realize that that's a crazy idea. You're probably going, wow, you're really naive. That's fair. I hear that. But I do think it's probably better than my laughing at someone's death or being glad that someone died, hoping that they got theirs, lusting after the murderer and ignoring their humanity and my own. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. If you have disagreements, and I'm sure you do, please pop them in the comments. I try to respond thoughtfully. And if you did like it, please like it. Please subscribe. Please share it with others. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.